Hello, I'm Xorijiy, and today we'll be exploring a vital component of foreign language teaching, assessment. More specifically, we'll focus on various strategies for assessing students' knowledge and skills in the language classroom. Whether you are working with young learners or adult students, effective assessment makes learning more focused, meaningful, and successful. Why assessment is essential? Assessment is an ongoing effort to diagnose issues and support learning. Let's begin with a simple truth. Assessment is not just about grading. It is a continuous process that helps us identify what students know, what they struggle with, and how we can support them better. It is like turning on the headlights while driving. It shows us the road ahead and helps us adjust our direction. One of the most important outcomes of assessment is feedback. Think of feedback as a bridge between teaching and learning. It allows teachers to refine their methods, and it helps students reflect on and improve their strategies. For example, if students perform poorly on a grammar quiz, and we can focus on those problem areas in the next lesson. This feedback loop keeps learning dynamic and responsive. Assessment is also a powerful motivational tool. When students receive positive specific feedback like great improvement in sentence structure, it builds confidence. It shows that their effort is noticed and appreciated. And when we reward process and just perfect results, we nurture a growth mindset in our classroom. So let's look at this slide to identify several types of assessment. First, formal assessment, structured and scheduled. Think of midterms or final exams. Those help us check mastery. Informal assessment, it is unplanned, ongoing checks during lessons. And diagnostic assessment done before teaching begins to see what students already know, useful for tailoring our plans. Formative assessment happens during the learning process. It provides feedback that supports improvement. Summative assessment means, and it happens after instructions like end-of-unit projects or presentations. Now let's look at each assessment type in details. Formal assessment is structured evaluations with standardized criteria. And here we can share some tips for teachers. For example, first of all, you should schedule at key milestones. For example, midterm exams. And align assessments with specific lesson objectives. What about informal assessment? It is less structured, real-time evaluations integrated into lessons. So what benefits do we have here? It provides immediate, low-pressure feedback. For example, in group discussions or in role plays, we can assess students informally. What about diagnostic assessment? So the goal of this assessment is to understand students' baseline skills before starting a lesson or module. Why it is so important? Because it helps teachers customize lesson plans to suit students' needs. And we can use diagnostic assessment in the form of pre-lesson vocabulary quizzes or speaking tasks to evaluate fluency and pronunciation. Formative assessment, and the goal of this assessment is to monitor progress and guide students during the learning process. What benefits do we have here? It provides continuous feedback for improvement. For example, oral presentations and in-class activities can be good for formative assessment. So, we have summative assessment as well. The goal of this assessment is to evaluate learning at the end of a course or unit. So, we have some outcomes of this assessment as well. It certifies achievement and highlights retention. For example, in final exams or end-of-term projects, we assess students in summative way. So now, let's turn to assessment methods. Teacher-led assessments. What tools can we actually use to assess our students? First, it is oral assessments like interviews or role plays. It helps us measure speaking fluency and accuracy. What about written assessments? tasks such as essays or grammar exercises, and they allow us to test writing skills and structure. Practical tasks, and here we ask students to compose an email, and it is like writing a real email or describing directions, test real-world communication and skills. So now let's turn to self-assessment. Assessment is not only done by the teacher, but we may have self-assessment as well. It helps students develop self-awareness, and we can use here several tools like checklists and journals. Checklists, here we can have some questions like, did I use correct verb forms? Or in journals, we may have some questions like, what challenge did I face during today's task? By answering these questions, students can identify their gaps and they can work on their weaknesses as well. What about peer assessment? Peer assessment encourages collaboration. It strengthens review each other's work using rubrics for guided prompts. Here we can give some tips for teachers. First of all, it's better to train students to give helpful and respectful criticism. And what outcomes do we have here? It encourages collaboration and critical thinking. Feedback as a central element. Now, let's go back to feedback. To be effective, feedback should be timely, which means immediately after a task for maximum impact. It should be specific as well. Here we have to focus on key aspects. For example, good use of adjectives. So it must be constructive as well. Here we should highlight strengths and suggest improvements. So when we give oral feedback, we can say, great job on sentence structure, but try to expand vocabulary. But when we give our feedback in written form, we should highlight correct grammar in green, but we should suggest improvements in red. So now let's look through several strategies which can give effectiveness. So how do we put all this together in our teaching? Here is a simple sequence. First of all, we should start with a diagnostic quiz and the beginning of the topic. It's better to use formative assessments like pair tasks or games during the lesson. It's better to finish with summative tasks such as a role play or written reflection. And do not forget technology. Online tools like quizzes or Kahoot, and they are helpful to assess students' knowledge. Now, let's come to a conclusion. Assessment is not just an endpoint, it's a guiding tool. It helps us personalize instruction, motivate learners, and measure real progress. When it's done well, it transforms our teaching from routine to reflective. And most importantly, it empowers students to take ownership of their learning. So, dear teachers, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you find this lesson useful and informative. We hope that you will be using these strategies in your lessons effectively.